What kind of man studies corpses, sketches, storms, dreams of flight, and then paints the most haunting smile in history? Leonardo da Vinci was never just a painter. He was a mind so restless, so searching, that the deeper this story goes, the more difficult he becomes to contain. Most people know the Mona Lisa. Far fewer know that the mystery of that smile was shaped by a man who peeled back the layers of the human face to understand every nerve and muscle beneath the skin. That is where the real story begins. Welcome back to English Mindwave. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and support more stories like this. The Mona Lisa might never have become the most famous painting in the world if Leonardo da Vinci had not mastered human anatomy. To capture that strange living smile, Leonardo dissected human bodies, studying the face from the inside out. He followed the Renaissance idea that an artist should first imagine the skeleton, then the muscles and skin, and only then the surface appearance. For Leonardo, beauty was never enough by itself. He wanted to know what made beauty possible. That desire led him far beyond painting. When he wrote to the ruler of Milan asking for work, he promoted himself first as an engineer who could design bridges, cannons, and military machines. Almost as an afterthought, he added that he could also paint. Leonardo was an artist, a scientist, and an engineer. But more than anything else, he was curious. His notebooks, filled with thousands of pages, move from anatomy to architecture, from optics to water, from birds to machines. Again and again, the same impulse appears. He wanted to understand how the world actually worked. Leonardo was born on April 15th, 1452, in Anciano, near Vinci, Italy, to Ser Piero and a local peasant girl named Caterina. He had what one biographer called the good luck to be born out of wedlock. If he had been born within the strict line of legitimacy, he might have been pushed into his father's profession as a notary, a life that would have suffocated his gifts. Instead, Leonardo spent his early years with his mother and then with his paternal grandparents, while his father worked in Florence. After his stepmother died, Leonardo moved to Florence at the age of 12 to live with his father in a city that stood at the center of the art world. Because he was born illegitimate, Leonardo was not sent to a formal Latin school. He attended an abacus school instead, where he learned practical mathematics, useful for trade and daily business. He struggled with Latin throughout his life and wrote mainly in Italian. He often wrote from right to left. And because he was left-handed, this helped him avoid smudging the ink. He also developed the habit of writing letters backward. Others mocked him for lacking the polished classical education admired by scholars. Leonardo brushed off that criticism. He believed experience was worth more than borrowed authority. He trusted direct observation more than quotations. That habit became one of the defining principles of his life. At the age of 14, Leonardo began an apprenticeship arranged by his father with the renowned artist Andrea del Verrocchio. In Verrocchio's workshop, he entered a world where painting, sculpture, mechanics, design, and anatomy all met. He studied Verrocchio's sculpture of David, paying attention to the lifelike veins and muscles that suggested subtle motion. Even early on, Leonardo was drawn to the problem of how still forms could seem alive. He soon began to stand out. It is believed that in Tobias and the Angel, Leonardo painted the gleaming fish, which looks far more vivid than the duller version by Antonio del Pollaiuolo, and that the prancing dog at the lower left carries a lively energy missing from other depictions. In the baptism of Christ, Leonardo's angel on the left feels more dynamic than Verrocchio's angel on the right. The student was already moving toward something his master could not fully teach. That ability to suggest life reached one of its greatest expressions in the Last Supper. Leonardo painted the scene at the moment Christ announces that one of the apostles will betray him. The men are arranged in groups of 3, but the composition never feels static. Each figure turns, gestures, recoils, questions, or leans in with a different emotional response. Judas, shadowed and clutching the silver paid for his betrayal, pulls away from the others, and his guilt seems to show even before a word is spoken. Leonardo once said that a picture of human figures should be made so that the viewer can recognize, through their gestures, the intentions of their minds. That principle shaped the entire work. Yet the Last Supper is not only powerful for its emotion, it is also one of the great triumphs of perspective in Western art. All the architectural lines converge at a single vanishing point located at Christ's forehead, drawing the eye directly to him and holding the composition together. To create that precision, Leonardo hammered a small nail into the wall near Jesus' head and cut thin, guiding incisions to map the perspective lines. If you stand on the left side of the room, it almost feels as if the painting spills into the real space, as though the viewer has entered the event itself. Leonardo was not painting a religious scene from a safe distance. He was building an experience. But the same mind that could create such emotional and spatial mastery was doing something even more radical behind the scenes. Leonardo dissected around 30 human bodies. He studied bones, muscles, tendons, nerves, and the structure of the skull. He drew the frontal sinus with striking accuracy. He investigated the heart and understood that it was a muscle. He made observations about aging arteries and the movement of blood through the valves. This was not a side hobby. This was part of the same pursuit that guided his art. Leonardo did not want merely to paint the face. He wanted to know what made a face move. He did not want merely to draw the body. He wanted to understand the mechanisms that gave it tension, grace brutals, expression, and life. That is why the Mona Lisa feels so different from ordinary portraiture. The painting is widely believed to depict Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a wealthy Florentine silk merchant. In it, Leonardo's knowledge as both scientist and artist comes fully together. His mastery of sfumato, the soft blending of tones without harsh edges, gives the face its lifelike transition from light into shadow. He understood how light rests on curved surfaces, how shadows shape expression, and how the eye reads emotion. The illusion that her eyes follow the viewer comes from his careful use of shading and perspective. Because the eyes appear to look directly outward, and because perspective in a two-dimensional painting does not shift as we move, they seem to stay with us wherever we go. But the most famous part of the painting is still the smile. Leonardo's understanding of visual perception helped create it. When the mouth is viewed directly, the delicate detail and shading can make the smile seem restrained. But when the viewer looks elsewhere and the mouth falls into peripheral vision, the broader contrasts make the smile appear fuller and more alive. It changes because Leonardo understood that seeing is not simple. The Mona Lisa becomes even more impressive when compared with an earlier work like Ginevra dei Benci, which is strong in its own right, but lacks the same emotional depth and technical subtlety. The Mona Lisa remained in Leonardo's studio until the end of his life. Leonardo's ambitions, however, were never limited to painting. In Milan, he spent years working on an enormous bronze horse, a monument commissioned by the Duke of Milan in honor of his late father. Leonardo studied horses intensely and built a massive clay model. But in 1494, the bronze intended for the statue was redirected to make cannons for defense against French invasion. Later, French troops used the clay model for target practice and destroyed it. It was a cruel fate for one of his grandest projects. Yet even in failure, the episode reveals the scale of his imagination. Leonardo thought in monumental terms. He also thought in terms of architecture and measurement. His famous Vitruvian Man reflects his study of the Roman architect Vitruvius and the belief that the proportions of the human body reflect universal order. In Leonardo's hands, the body became more than an object of beauty. It became a system of ratios, geometry, and meaning. The same intellect that traced the muscles of the face also searched for harmony in structures, machines, and built space. In 1502, when he was in his 50s, Leonardo became the chief military architect and engineer to Cesare Borgia, the ruthless son of Pope Alexander VI. Here, his abilities found an immediate practical use. His most important contribution to Borgia's military campaign was the creation of a highly accurate map of Imola. At the time, maps were often symbolic and unreliable. Leonardo used a magnetic compass to produce a map of unusual scientific precision, one that could genuinely guide strategy. It helped Borgia identify weak points, plan attacks, and position troops effectively. In this work, Leonardo helped lay the foundations of modern cartography. once again, he was turning observation into power. He also designed machines and studied large-scale engineering problems. He imagined devices for war and defense, but he also thought about water with almost obsessive intensity. In his final years, he became fascinated by its destructive force. His deluge drawings show apocalyptic visions of swirling water overwhelming the land, as if nature itself had become a violent intelligence. He had long studied rivers and considered ways to divert the Arno River through major engineering works. Water, for Leonardo, was never only scenery. It was energy, motion, transformation, and threat. Flight drew him in with the same force. He studied birds closely and sketched machines inspired by their movement. Among these designs was the aerial screw, an early concept for a helicopter using a spiral rotor meant to lift into the air. The technology of the 15th century could not make such a machine workable, but the design reveals the reach of his thinking. Leonardo was always asking where human limits really ended. After the Duke of Milan was overthrown in 1499, Leonardo spent more than a decade wandering across Italy. Eventually, he found support from the French crown. In 1516, King Francis I invited him to his court, drawn by the brilliance of his mind. Leonardo spent the rest of his life in a red brick manor near the king's castle in the Loire Valley. There, still carrying the Mona Lisa with him, he continued refining the painting. Even at the end, he did not think of his greatest work as finished. Leonardo da Vinci died on May 2nd, 1519, at the age of 67, possibly from a stroke. Though he was not known for outward religiosity, his will commended his soul to Almighty God and to the Virgin Mary. His life remains one of history's most extraordinary unions of art and science. Science informed his art, and his art gave visible form to the beauty and complexity of science. What is especially remarkable is that he was largely self-taught. The education that made Leonardo was not primarily a classroom education. It came from endless observation, patient study, and a refusal to accept the surface of things as the final truth. That is why Leonardo still matters. He was not great simply because he excelled in many fields. He was great because he never stopped asking what lay beneath appearance, beneath a smile, beneath a body, beneath a machine, beneath a river, beneath a city, beneath the visible world itself. He lived as if reality always had one more layer, waiting to be uncovered. And perhaps that is why, centuries later, he still feels less like a figure trapped in the past than a mind still moving among us.